Happy Wednesday, Mount members. Welcome to Bible study. We appreciate you for being on this journey with us. This is our 10th lesson on Joseph's journey to forgiveness. And we're going to be finishing up this series next week. So I challenge you to go back and watch some of the previous lessons to get caught up if you have not been with us up to this point. Some really good tools that we've been sharing with you guys over the past few months now, and so hopefully you've been blessed by it. And today I need you to help us spread the word. And so if you're watching this at noon, watching this at 6:30, we're live on Facebook, live on YouTube, live on Twitter, and those of you who are watching or listening by way of dial pad, let somebody know that we want you to jump in and to take part in this conversation. And for those who are watching at noon and 6:30 on Wednesday, today on this Wednesday, we won't be having our after Bible study call. Today, but prayerfulness Bible study in itself will be a blessing to you. As we re-enter Joseph's story, we are now in the 46th chapter of Genesis, and we find that Jacob has departed the familiar land of Canaan to travel to see his long-lost son. And though Jacob has never been to Egypt before, his grandfather, Abraham, traveled there during a time of famine in his own life. It was in Egypt where Abraham lied to Pharaoh by telling him that Sarah was his sister rather than his wife. That story is in the 12th chapter of Genesis, when terrible plagues came upon Egypt as a result. So when Pharaoh discovered that Abraham and Sarah were married, he sent them away. Jacob's encounter with Pharaoh could not have been more different. In verses 1 through 7, Reverend Butler shared last week how Jacob was reassured by God that God is with him and that God would bless Egypt. Verses 8 through 27 list the people who traveled from Hebron to Egypt with him. And in verse 28, Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. Then finally, verse 29 is the moment, 22 years in the making. Listen.
Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph,
"Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive."
There is much weeping and little talking on Joseph's part. By forgiving and reconciling with his brothers, Joseph regains the father that he had lost many years ago. He spent his first 17 years with his father, and now he will have another 17 years with him in Egypt before Jacob dies at the age of 147. Joseph also gains the blessing of having an entire family with him, his brothers and his many nieces and many nephews. In a previous lesson, we noted that reconciling with people who have hurt us can open the door for blessings in other relationships as well. When we refuse to forgive or reconcile with our offenders, we can miss out on collateral relationships along the way. For example, when we cannot reconcile with one friend, we can lose our relationships with mutual friends caught in the crossfire. But as we forgive and reconcile, we experience blessings that also affect others around us. Now, as we finish Genesis, the 46th chapter, we find Joseph instructing his family on what they are to say to Pharaoh. Let's keep on listening.
Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household,
"I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were living in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds. They tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, 'What is your occupation?' you should answer, 'Your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did.' Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians.
Verse 34 tells us that knowing they are shepherds, Pharaoh will allow them to live in the land of Goshen because the Egyptians despise shepherds. Now, I wonder if Joseph is protecting them in some way. Perhaps he knows his family will be left alone or won't be seen as a threat to Egyptian commerce. Or perhaps he is protecting them from the temptation to intermarry with the Egyptians or adopt pagan practices, which God had clearly warned his people not to do. Another option is that Joseph just wants them to be totally honest with Pharaoh. He knows his brothers have a history of deceit, and perhaps he wants to be sure that they don't tarnish his reputation as a man of integrity in Egypt. No matter the reason behind Joseph's instructions, we see him reunited and caring for the welfare of his family. As they move into a new land that Joseph has known for over 2 decades now, he leads, he provides, and he reconnects with his family. It is a beautiful picture of God's amazing grace. We're moving into chapter 47 now. Here are the first few verses.
Joseph went and told Pharaoh,
My father and brothers, with their flocks and herds and everything they own, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen.
He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked the brothers,
What is your occupation?
Your servants are shepherds,
They replied to Pharaoh.
just as our fathers were.
They also said to him,
We have come to live here for a while because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture.
So now, please let your servants settle in Goshen.
The text says that Joseph chose 5 of his brothers to present themselves to Pharaoh. Which ones did he choose? According to tradition, when Joseph went before Pharaoh, he took with him Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Benjamin, and Issachar. While some commentators think he took stronger brothers, rabbinic tradition believes he took weaker looking brothers so that Pharaoh wouldn't be tempted to make soldiers out of them. Whatever the reason, Joseph brings his brothers in first, having previously coached them about how to answer any questions about their occupation. As an intuitive leader who knows Pharaoh well, Joseph wants his brothers to be honest about their livelihood as shepherds. Perhaps Joseph wants his family separated from the Egyptians so that they will not be tempted by the pagan idolatry of the culture. One commentator notes, quote, Joseph emphasizes that his family are shepherds to ensure Pharaoh that they entertain no social or political ambition and to preserve them from an alien way of life and intermarriage with Egyptians. Listen to Pharaoh's response to the brothers and then his interaction with Jacob.
Pharaoh said to Joseph,
Your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock.
Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him,
How old are you?
And Jacob said to Pharaoh,
The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers.
Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their children.
Pharaoh blessed the brothers with the land of Goshen and even mentions the possibility of brothers overseeing some of his royal sheep and cows. After Joseph presents Jacob before Pharaoh, the first topic of conversation is age. At 130 years, Jacob is already 20 years past the average Egyptian age. Pharaoh is impressed by Jacob, not only because he is the father of Joseph, his second in command, but also because of his longevity. Jacob's response to Pharaoh's question includes his status as a pilgrim and as a sojourner. He said, quote, "My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers," unquote. The Hebrew word for pilgrimage used here is defined as a, quote, "sojourning place, dwelling place, sojourning lifetime," unquote. Warren Wiersbe writes, "Everybody has some metaphor to describe life, a battle, a race, a trap, a puzzle, and Jacob's metaphor was that of a pilgrimage." As you think about your life, how would you describe your pilgrimage? Now, none of our pilgrimages are exactly like that of another. The danger comes when we get stuck in the day and fail to see the larger picture of where we are headed. We easily forget that the road that we are treading right now is temporary, and that our true citizenship is in heaven. We are just visitors making a journey on this planet. We need to remember that we are God's pilgrim. One Bible commentator put it this way, quote, "God's people through the ages have been encouraged to regard themselves as pilgrims, and when they do, they develop a unique approach to life," unquote. And I agree. When we realize that this earth is not all there is, it affects the way that we live. At this point, Jacob knows that he has missed out on 22 years of Joseph's life because his sons sold Joseph into slavery. He could resent them so bitterly that it tears his family apart. Yet, he chooses a pilgrim mentality instead. A pilgrim mentality reminds us that life is short and that unforgiveness can keep us from those we love most, often the ones who seem to hurt us the most. As we recognize that each of us is on a journey, it should give us compassion for our fellow sojourners. They are in process, just as we are. I've wasted time and mental energy on resentments over past hurts, which has spoiled my ability to enjoy the present journey alongside others. We miss the blessings of today when we are stuck in resentment for things that happened yesterday. God desires us to walk our roads together, especially in our families and the community of believers. And when you get a chance, I want you to read the rest of Genesis 47. It describes Joseph's plan to ration food out during the famine. Now, Genesis 47 comes to a close with Jacob at 147 years old and him being on his deathbed. He asks Joseph to promise him that he will not be buried in Egypt, but return to his homeland to be buried with his ancestors. Jacob reminds Joseph that Egypt is transitory and God will bring their people back to the land of Canaan. And so I say to you, even if you are in Egypt right now, don't forget the promise that there is a Canaan. Jacob repeated his promises of God to his son, and later Joseph will repeat God's promises to his brothers. And I want you to listen as we move into Genesis 48.
Some time later, Joseph was told,
"Your father is ill."
so he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Jacob was told,
"Your son Joseph has come to you,"
Israel rallied his strength and sat up on the bed. Jacob said to Joseph,
God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit, they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. As I was returning from Padan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while we were still on the way. a little distance from Ephrath. So I buried her there, beside the road to Ephrath.
That is, Bethlehem. When Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked,
Who are these?
They are the sons God has given me here.
Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said,
Bring them to me so I may bless them.
Now Israel's eyes were failing because of old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph,
I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too.
Having reminded Joseph of God's promise to bless them, Jacob now prepares to bless his children and grandchildren. His eyesight has grown dim, so he asks his father to confirm their identity as his grandsons. Listen, as Jacob pronounces the blessing and notices his actions and message, they do not follow human logic and tradition. And pay attention, because this is the first time in biblical account that we see Joseph get a little angry about something. And I'm glad to know that he got upset sometimes. This makes him a little more human to us. Listen.
Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left toward Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger. And crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn.
We know from verse 12 that Joseph is prostrate with his face to the ground as Jacob gives the blessing. It is from this position, after the blessing has already been given, that Joseph notices his father crossed his arms and gave his younger son priority over the older. It's ironic that Jacob does this knowing that he himself stole the blessing from his older brother Esau. However, one scholar points out, Jacob may be losing his sight, but he's not losing his insight. We have to trust that God guided him in this prophetic hand switching. Jacob blesses Joseph, then Joseph's sons.
Then he blessed Joseph and said,
May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth.
When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him,
No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.
But his father refused and said,
I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations.
He blessed them that day and said,
In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh.
So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh.
Honestly, as a son and a father, I would have struggled with Jacob's hand crossing just as Joseph did. Joseph might have been concerned about his father giving the greater blessing to the younger son because he had been the favored younger son and had seen the consequences of sibling rivalry. Perhaps he wanted to spare Ephraim and Manasseh any cause for division as brothers. Yet what seems most logical to us isn't always God's plan. And although God is a God of order, we need to remember that it is God's order, not ours. God's ways are perfect, but they don't always seem that way from our point of view. God's ways and God's thoughts transcend ours. We can't see the complete picture, but if we could, we would make the same decision that God would make. Knowing all the future generations in Ephraim and Manasseh's legacy, God let Jacob know that the younger would be greater than the older. Joseph believed his older son should receive the greater blessing, but God went against his human tradition and human logic. Even when things go against what seems right to us, remember that God has a plan, and it is a perfect one. All right, I want to keep going into Genesis 49. Jacob blessed Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, in chapter 48. Now, as we turn to Genesis 49, we find Jacob's final prophecies and blessings to his offspring. His words reveal different blessings or consequences for each of them. Fun fact, when Jacob blesses his son in Genesis 49, he does not give the blessings according to birth order. Instead, he groups them according to the boys' mothers, with one separation occurring with Bilhah's son.
Then Jacob called for his sons and said,
Gather round so I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father, Israel. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power, turbulent as the waters. You will no longer excel, for you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger, so fierce, and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations be his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his coat to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun will live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. His border will extend towards Sidon. Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. I look for your deliverance, Lord. Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. Asher's food will be rich. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady, his strong arms stayed limber, because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God, who helps you, because of the Almighty, who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, blessings of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph. on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey. In the evening he divides the plunder.
All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to him.
When we read later books of the Bible, we see the fulfillment of many of these prophecies when we study the Israelite tribes in later biblical history. For example, the tribe of Zebulun did become seafaring people, as Jacob mentioned. We also see the principle of sowing and reaping illustrated. Reuben, Simeon, and Levi left a legacy of bad choices that would impact future generations of their family. One scholar observes, quote, "From this first oracle, the teaching is clear that the behavior of one individual affects the destiny of its descendants," unquote. Now, while tendencies toward anger, addiction, and other patterns of sin can trickle down from generation to generation, sin does not have to define us. We all have skeletons in our closet, but they don't have to be the legacy we leave. There are two things we can learn from these prophecies and their subsequent fulfillment. First, while we're alive, we always have the opportunity to change direction. While we are alive, we always have the opportunity to change directions. Remember how Judah was a main character in the plot against young Joseph in Genesis 37? In Genesis 38, he hired a prostitute who he later learned was his daughter-in-law. Judah started out on the wrong road, but he eventually got back on the right path of yielding to God. Throughout our study, we have seen change, a lot of it. His heart is softer, his leadership is bolder, and now he is indicated as the lineage through which the Messiah will come. You may be wondering, why didn't God use the line of Joseph rather than the line of Judah? Genesis records almost no flaws in Joseph's life, but many in Judah's character. While we don't know the answer, it gives me hope to see God use flawed people again and again and again for God's eternal purposes. This shows us that God can use me and you as well. Second, don't waste your suffering. In Genesis 42, Simeon was kept in prison, while the other 9 went back to Canaan. This brother languished in prison for probably 2 years. And when it's time to get or give out blessings and prophecies, Jacob says about brothers Simeon and Levi, quote, "Cursed be their anger, so fierce, and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel." Commenting on these verses, one scholar writes, eventually Simeon is integrated into the tribe of Judah, and hence scatter here means dissolve. In other words, Simeon's legacy dissolved into the tribe of Judah. Judah learned through suffering, and his legacy continued. Simeon wasted his suffering, and his tribe dissolved. His younger brother Joseph endured a lot in his lifetime. However, at the end of his life, Jacob could see Joseph as a fruitful vine, still flourishing in spite of all that had happened to him. Throughout the Genesis account, we've seen him relying on the Lord, forgiving his brothers, attributing any ability he has to God, and being used to save a nation through his good planning and his incredible insight. He left a legacy of blessings for those who came after him. Now, I need you to keep in mind, Joseph and Simeon both served unjust sentences in prison. Joseph learned through his suffering, but Simeon did not. Living in an unfair world, we all have unique struggles. Many of them come at the hands of other people. The posture that we take toward our suffering and our offenders will greatly affect the kind of character produced in our lives. Don't let your pain be in vain. Wasting our sufferings by remaining hard-hearted and unteachable impacts the legacy that you will leave. If, like Joseph and Judah, we learn through our struggles, we can bestow blessings on the tribe that will come long after we have left the earth. whether they are your children, whether they are your grandchildren, whether they are your nieces or your nephews, whether it is kids that you teach or teens that you mentor or someone else you invest in, you are leaving a legacy to those who come after you. Make it a positive one. Listen, as I said at the beginning, we're not doing an after Bible study discussion today. However, I do want to leave you with a question to consider. If someone were to interview the people with whom you have the closest contact on a regular basis, which would they say your legacy is more like? Are you a Judah? You had some pretty big mistakes in your past, but then you changed directions and began following God wholeheartedly. Are you a Simeon? You suffered as much as anybody, but you continue to be led by your emotions rather than to learn from your past. Or are you a Joseph? While nobody's perfect, you lived a life of integrity, attempting to pursue God through times of difficulty and prosperity. God bless you. I'm going to miss seeing you after Bible study today, but we'll pick back up next week as we have our last Bible study on forgiveness. We are now a little close. We're almost at 75% of our Lenten journey completed. So I pray that you go hard with us for this last quarter of the journey. Join us tomorrow morning for our prayer call. Join us Friday morning for our prayer call. Join us Saturday for our prayer call at 7 a.m. Join us on Sunday for worship at 10:45 here at the Mount. And we offer online as well. All right. Thank you. I pray this Bible study bless y'all today. God bless you. Tell somebody to check it out.